All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. If you've already been tuning in this week, you know that we are taking a deep dive into climate change. We're talking to scientists, to explorers, to media producers, film, video, and images who are doing research, who are out in the field documenting what's happening with our changing planet, and of course, those who are looking for innovative solutions to the challenges that we are facing. So we're into day 2 now. Day 1 was a great day with 4 live events spanning from Antarctica to the Arctic and our oceans. And we still have 4 more days of live events coming up. So if you head over to exploringbytheseat.com under our special events, you will find the deep dive into climate change, and you can still get in on the action. Lots of events coming up this week as we explore climate change. All right, let's get into our 12 p.m. event. I'm really excited to have Alison Criscitiello joining us. She is the director of the Canadian Ice Core lab at the University of Alberta. She's an ice core scientist with extensive field experience on glaciers in Antarctica, the Canadian High Arctic, Greenland, Alaska, and the Canadian Rockies. So her research uses new polar ice core records to learn about how the marine influence on coastal ice caps and ice sheets has changed over time. So ultimately, this will help with future projections of how the ice caps are going to contribute to global sea level, as well as advancing our understanding of the ocean ice atmosphere system, because they are deeply connected. So I want to give a shout out to our classrooms joining us on camera today, and I can see lots of comments already coming in via YouTube. If you are tuning in live via YouTube, let us know where you're joining from, and of course send us in some questions when the time comes. But for now, I'm going to head over to Alberta and bring Alison live in with us. All right. Hey, Alison, how are you doing today?
Hi, Joe.
All right. Well, it's great to see you. I'm trying to think. I think the last time we had a live event together, you were actually out on the ice fields, which is pretty wild. So I'm going to share that link in the chat so that students can check it out afterwards. But it's just as much fun having you hanging out in the lab.
Yeah, I think so. I'm about to head out actually in about a week to where we talked on the Columbia ice field. But we got the ice sitting here now.
All right, very cool. Well, Alison, I'm going to let you take over a little bit. We're excited to get to know you a little bit better and learn a bit about your work. And then we're going to let the students take over with some questions.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, my connection's not great. I'm going to share my screen. Is that good?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Just give me one quick second here.
All right, I can see it's loading up. I see the spinning wheel.
All right. Hey, Joe, can you just let me know that you can hear me okay, since my connection's not so great?
Yeah, we can hear you okay, Alison. It's still loading on this end, the presentation. Oh, there it goes. We're good.
You're good? Okay. Yeah, sorry about this. It's a funny day here in the lab. Yeah, well, just jump in and let me know if you're not able to hear me. Well, thank you so much for inviting me today, Joe. I love talking to classrooms. So it's really exciting to talk to you all today. And as Joe mentioned quickly, I'm an ice core scientist, and I'm also a mountaineer and sort of professional adventurer. And I wanted to spend my time with you today talking a little bit about both parts of my life, since they're intertwined, and together they tell a more complete story of why I do what I do and why I do the science that I do. So here we go. It's a bit more from the beginning than I usually do. Well, I grew up in New England, actually, with an identical twin sister. And I've always thought that having a twin, this built-in adventure partner, literally since birth, was the thing about me that enabled me to begin exploring really cold, frozen, wild places from a very young age. And my parents seemed to think that if we were together, we could do anything and we'd be just fine. So no matter what we had planned, they sort of said, if you're together, go do it. And at 12 in winter, we did the Presidential Traverse in New Hampshire, which is Yeah, it would be hard for me to do now. I can't believe I did it back then and I was allowed to. But it wasn't long before the two of us explored a large swath of Alaska together. And in hindsight, it's just incredible that we had these opportunities to explore when we were young together. And we constantly created these little mini expeditions to the coldest places that we could find and get to from where we grew up in Boston. By 20, I was working as a climbing ranger in Olympic National Park and North Cascades, both in Washington State. And in just a few short years, I noticed changes in those mountains that I was living and working in. And these changes became really important to me because I felt like these landscapes were becoming my home. I was noticing earlier melt onset, exposed ice on Mount Olympus's Blue Glacier that was creeping higher and higher every year, and an increase as well in accidents due to rockfall and avalanche as the high mountain terrain shifted and became less trustworthy. A snow bridge over a large crevasse located in a pass at the very back of this photo almost swallowed me whole at 20 years old when the other climbing ranger, who was attached to me on a rope, punched through the snow bridge that nearly ended the both of us. This was a pass, a glacier, a snow bridge that we had crossed dozens of times. We were both extremely shaken, of course, by this event in a number of ways. It was a near fatal crevasse fall. And I thought a lot about how the landscapes that I was learning to read were changing. And this really is exactly what I still think about, both as an ice core scientist and as a mountaineer. I think about and investigate how these landscapes that I love and that I'm still learning to read are changing. Now, most of my work takes place near the poles in the Arctic, Antarctica, where change can often be too tiny, too incremental, the timescales too vast to see. In the most remote parts of Antarctica's ice sheets, the best places for drilling ice cores and reconstructing climate histories in the past, this is the case. The changes in climate that get recorded in the ice, proven through chemical analyses of the ice itself and the air bubbles that are trapped in the ice, tell a story that we can't actually see with our own eyes. But other places, the Canadian Arctic archipelago, the Canadian Rocky Mountains, actually show their change to scientists and adventurers alike. Even on Devon Ice Cap, where this photo is from, where you can see these melt layers, those clear ice melt layers. Even here on Devon Ice Cap, deep in the Canadian high Arctic, summer melt is becoming significant. And significant too is how humans have impacted even the most remote polar regions by chemicals that we've introduced into our environment. On the Columbia ice field, last time I talked to some classrooms live with Joe, we're investigating up there whether melting glaciers may be a source of contaminants that accumulated over many years and can be released rapidly into downstream ecosystems in a warming world. Now, these legacy contaminants, which means they're things that we don't use anymore, but historically people did use these chemicals. These legacy contaminants are substances, again, no longer in use, but are melting out of the snowpack now, and they could reach the tap downstream, meaning, things that are sitting up there on the Columbia ice field may actually end up in our drinking water, exactly where I'm sitting here in Edmonton right now. Now, in an ice core that I drilled on northern Ellesmere Island, very, very far north in the Arctic, we've measured certain persistent organic pollutants, which fall into a class that have no known degradation pathway in the environment. So these persistent pollutants are making their way to the most remote environments on Earth, as insidious as a warming climate. Also at another spot on northernmost Ellesmere Island, we've recently found a 10-fold increase in a certain class of environmental contaminants since the mid-1980s when they were introduced. And we, humans, are the dominant source of these chemicals to remote regions. Analyzing ice cores for environmental contaminants, which is something that's newer to me, has actually been a bit of a gut punch. But it's not so different as connecting the dots between a planned expedition and the one that actually unfolds. Skiing across vast expanses during a 2-month expedition through the eastern Pamirs. My ski partners here and I had timed our expedition based on previous year's weather, a traverse entirely in winter at altitude across the lines of Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, and China. But the snow didn't come that year. We jokingly changed the name of our expedition, Border Ski, to Border Walk. We had to link snow-free zones, historically snow-covered, by traveling on frozen rivers. And ultimately, we had an adventure that was in no way the one that we had planned for. It meant we had to think very quickly and adapt, much as I've been doing recently in my science. On another expedition, this time in our own backyard, we decided to bike in winter from Dawson to Tuktoyaktuk. The final 190 kilometers were on the Anubic to Tuk ice road on its final year in existence. We skittered on the frozen Mackenzie River Delta channels and then across the frozen Arctic Ocean the winter of 2017 before this road closed permanently. Now, since this ice road opened in the early 1970s, parts of the Northwest Territories have experienced significant warming in winter season months from October to May. There was a real sense of urgency with this particular adventure. If we didn't do it now, it wouldn't be possible. And who knew what we might see along the way? As luck would have it, we coincided with spring jamborees in the communities along the way. And outside Anubic, we caught the Reindeer Crossing as they made their way to spring calving grounds. This was an adventure that really might never have come to be if the fire of urgency, that now or never, hadn't been there. Change, too, has come to some of the most stoic, cold, high peaks that I've climbed. Logan, Denali, Aconcagua, the highest peaks on each of the continents, are not immune to change. I'll be drilling an ice core at 5,500 meters on Logan Summit Plateau over the next 2 seasons, and I actually leave next month for the first season. The new Mount Logan Ice Core will lead to a better understanding of North Pacific climate variability over the last 30,000 years, and the role of coastal mountain ranges and glaciers in the regional and global climate system. Logan is a mountain that I think about a lot. It's a mountain that has pushed me to my own limits before, and I'm sure it will again this May. With every expedition, whether scientific or for the pure adventure of it, I seem to learn over and over that this is a time of opportunity and discovery. It's a time to make changes within our own lives and our own communities collectively for the good and the health of our planet. Now, some of this new hope is what's led me to found Girls on Ice Canada with 2 other Canadian women. And I wanted to end talking a little bit about this. Girls on Ice Canada is a free science immersion wilderness expedition for female identifying high schoolers that interweaves science, art, and adventure to help inspire leadership, curiosity, and confidence in the next generation of leaders. Field science builds connection to nature. And the idea with the program is to remove all barriers to people who are traditionally excluded from access to the mountains and the outdoors. Now, one thing we can all do is learn more about the history and context surrounding the practice of science and the exploration of the natural world in an effort to understand how our culture still benefits some people over others. We designed Girls on Ice Canada very intentionally with these considerations at the forefront. The program is completely tuition-free from the moment they step out their door, and rather than being chosen to participate as a reward for previous achievement, like a lot of programs, we seek rather to serve those who have not been given opportunities in the past. Now, one of the reasons we founded this program was to create a sense of belonging in the outdoors and field science. And this, for me, really is the most critical, that we see ourselves reflected in the spaces that we are curious about. We see ourselves reflected in the spaces that we want to be. When I was a young climbing ranger in Olympic National Park, I did not see myself reflected around me. I was the first female climbing ranger since that park was established in 1938. As a young woman, that meant that a layer of complexity and difficulty was added to my job from the moment I put on my uniform. So to end with one overall take-home message, this is what I would say. The outdoors, the cold and the high, and yes, the changing places on our planet are spaces for everyone. Thanks.
All right. Well, Alison, thank you so much for sharing that presentation with us. I mean, your other office is pretty beautiful. The one you're heading to in about a week. That's a pretty beautiful spot to be able to do your work and take your samples. I'm curious, you mentioned, since seeing changes year after year after year, so you do go to the Columbia ice field, regularly. Do you see those changes year by year? Can you actually see differences year by year?
Yeah, maybe not year to year, somewhere like the Columbia ice field, but I know in talking to climbers and scientists that have worked there longer than I have, that on decadal, 10-year kind of timescales, absolutely. And the change on the Columbia ice field in particular over some people's lifetimes who are talking about it right now is just incredible. I mean, yes, you can see it with your own eyes. The change that I see from last season to this season is less noticeable, but again, over several years or 10-year timescales, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to give a shout out to the groups on YouTube. I can see we have lots of students tuning in. So use that chat sidebar and send us in some questions. In fact, I'm going to go with a first one that's come in here already from a student. And they're wondering about drilling the ice, taking the ice cores. Is that something that you really enjoy doing?
I do. I do love it. I think sometimes I get a little bit nervous. Like I'm a little nervous now about going out next week because it's very cold. But I love the actual drilling, and for me, I always find this balance between being in the field, being out in these beautiful places, and then being in the lab and doing this really, very clean, difficult analytical chemistry. And I think if I didn't go out and drill and have that field piece, it might be hard for me motivated to do the other part, but I love both sides, and the drilling itself is really, really fun, and it uses a lot of different skill sets. There's always, something always goes wrong, always. So there's always sort of engineering challenges in the field, and all the things also that just come along with camping, because we're camping out where we're drilling these ice cores. So it's, never a dull moment.
All right, very cool. And what kind of depths will you be doing when you get out there next week? What kind of depths are you looking to reach?
Yeah, good question. On the Columbia ice field, we're drilling 20-meter cores, and that's with a sort of what we call a shallow drill. And then the next month in May I'll be doing a radar survey, looking at the internal structure of the ice to ultimately drill something like a 200-meter core on Logan. So these show the shallow and intermediate depths that we commonly drill at.
All right, very cool. So I'm going to take one more question from YouTube actually, there's tons of questions coming in via YouTube. So I'm going to take one more from there, and then I'm going to slide over to our camera classrooms and get a couple of questions from them. But another student is wondering about a typical day. How much of that day would be spent actually physically drilling and taking those samples?
That is an awesome question. It takes so much time in cold, -30s, just to do your living stuff, to set up your shelter, to make food and water. That I would say on the Columbia ice field, just as an example, the actual drilling per day might be something on the order of 6 to 8 hours, but we are up way longer than 12 hours. So the rest of the time is spent doing things like melting snow to make water so you can drink, cooking, putting tents out, because all of these sites are in very exposed, cold, windy places where tents get buried by snow very quickly. So it's possible on any given day you're spending about half your awake hours sort of dealing with these more survival things, and then half the time actually drilling, which seems crazy, but that's what's required in that environment. That's an awesome question.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm thoroughly impressed. I'm excited here in Ontario because we've had a few warm days, and I enjoy going out for snowboarding for a few hours, but I don't know if I could do like a week up on the ice field. So not only is it amazing work you get to do, but you're pretty darn tough too to be able to stay out in the cold and get it done. So that's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Let's see. Let's go to a live camera classroom here. Let's go to California, Benicia, California, where I bet you they're not too concerned about the snow. So let me bring in Mr. Barcenas here, and we'll see if he's got a question or two for us. How are we doing, Mr. Barcenas?
I'm doing well. I'm sending my students in Google Classroom. This is meters to feet, so you understand how far she's drilling.
Gotcha. Good stuff.
I have some questions coming in, and one student asks, his name is Tyler, is there a preferred time of year that you like to drill in the glaciers?
I love this question too. Yes, absolutely. The way that we figure out timing is basically, we don't want it to be really, really cold, say -40, just because it's so hard to work and to be touching the drill, which is all metal. It's just so cold. But we also want to make sure that there's no melt on the snow surface where we're drilling. And that's because when there is some melt and then refreeze, it's extremely easy to get the drill stuck. So it sort of becomes dangerous in terms of losing equipment. So we have to find this fine line between temperatures that we can withstand and not having any melt. So it has to be below freezing. So let's see, something around, let's say 20 Fahrenheit or -10 C, in that kind of range is really ideal. So what that means on the Columbia ice field is that springtime, April, May, is really the window. In the Arctic, it's the same. It's the springtime. So April, May, June, and if you go a little bit later, even in the far, far north, you'll start to get some melt at the surface, and then you're really pushing it. And then, of course, in Antarctica, it's the opposite because the seasons are switched. So usually around Christmas time, December, January is the best time filling in Antarctica. So it's finding that fine line between melting and too cold.
All right, we'll come back your way shortly, Mr. Barcenas, for another question. I want to go to Mrs. Shaughnessy, grade 6s in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Let me bring her in. How are we doing, Thunder Bay? Oh, can you hit the mute for me?
Hello, we're doing well, thank you. Hi.
Awesome.
I have a question from a student. I'm going to see if I can pin him to the screen and have him read or say his question. I'm just going to try to see if this works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. No, it didn't work. I'm still on. Okay, that's all right. Everybody else can see him in my class. So Karsten, if you talk, it should work. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we gotcha.
How long does it take to get to like the glacier at the bottom?
So I think his question was, how long does it take you to drill all the way down to the bedrock through a great glacier?
How long does it take to drill these deeper ones all the way to the bedrock?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So the deeper cores, I'm not good at translating the meters. This is funny. I think now in meters. So say we're talking about a 200 meter deep core, like the one that I'll be drilling on Mount Logan, where you're going from the surface all the way to the bedrock that's below the ice. I'd say on average, it takes something like a month. But in Antarctica, just because of all the logistics of flying out into the deep field in these small planes and having to set up this whole camp and setting up these bigger drills, in Antarctica, all in all, it's more like 3 months actually. So it's a bit different in the Arctic and the Antarctic because of these human factors, the logistics of it. So, but we're talking about months, yeah.
All right. Alison, I have a question for you, and I don't know if it's possible, but Mr. Harrison's class is wondering about this. Are you on a laptop right now?
I am on a laptop.
Are you close to the freezer? Would it be possible to look in, or is it not?
I can walk across the hall. I might lose you, but I might not.
If you can try, I think they're just curious to see what a core looks like. We don't want to make you take one out, but if it's possible to walk to the freezer, that would be kind of cool.
Let's do it.
All right.
And actually, because I hope I don't lose you, because we're packing to leave for the Columbia ice field, I have the drill sitting out actually.
Oh, very cool.
So let's see what we can see. So I was sitting in the analytical lab, but the cold lab is on the other side of the hallway here. All right.
So far, so good.
Yeah. Okay. It's minus 40 in here. I'm not going to last long.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the cold lab has 2 rooms. Now this is the room with has 1.5 kilometers of ice.
Wow.
So the ice, can you see that?
Yeah, all the tubes stacked up on the shelves.
That's right. So let's see. So all of these tubes contain 1 meter of ice. So there's 1.5 kilometers of ice in here sitting in those tubes. Now, those canisters that are on the floor are from the Columbia ice field too. Those are for some contaminant analyses. But yeah, this room goes back and back. It's got a lot of ice in it, mostly from the Canadian high Arctic. And I'll show you really quick, since this is working. This is the ice core cutting room, and there's someone working in here.
Looks all bundled up.
He's all bundled up. It's a live classroom. Yeah. Yeah, so that room is dedicated to the cutting and imaging of ice. What he's doing in there right now is taking these really high resolution digital images of the ice, which allows us to look at melt layers and volcanic layers and sediment, things like that. If I've still got you, I'll try to show you. Yeah, we're packing. So here's some of the equipment going into the field. The drill itself is actually in these 3 boxes, the red and the 2 orange boxes. So that's the shallow drill, which fits in that red sled. And we can pull it around on the snow. And you can see that green motor is what we drilled down with. That's probably about it. You can see that shallow drill is pretty compact, and yeah, we can just pull it around behind us in a sled. And then the bigger drill, which is not inside, is a much bigger deal. We have to pull it around with a snowmobile.
All right, Alison, very cool. Thank you.
I'm glad that worked.
Mr. Harrison's class says thank you, big exclamation mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, it worked. The signal was great. We made our little virtual field trip into the other part of the lab. Very cool.
Yeah.
And it looked like your colleague was very bundled up to be working in the cutting lab.
Yeah, when people are made for it, they're made for it. I have to take breaks, but he just stays in there all day, scanning ice, cutting ice.
Very cool. Well, listen, we've got more questions. We'll visit our camera classes again and a couple more from YouTube. So the first one here is from Mr. Onifrock's class, and they're wondering, you get those ice core samples, how do you get them intact back to the lab?
Oh, with a lot of stress. It's so stressful shipping ice around. Let's see. I'll use the Columbia ice field as an example again. We, as soon as the ice gets to the surface, often if it's going to just sit around, we put it in these really special, very highly insulated boxes, and we bury them just to make sure they stay a really consistent temperature to what they've been experiencing underneath, the surface of the snow. And they kind of stay that way in these boxes that we keep under the snow until a helicopter or a small fixed wing plane shows up. And then when it does, these boxes are quite large, but you can fit some usually in a helicopter. You can put some under the helicopter in a big net called a sling load. So we get them out of the field, and if they go inside with you, the pilot has to keep the aircraft cold. So we call those cold deck flights. Other passengers, if they ever end up on one, don't really like you that much. They keep the whole aircraft at about minus 20. So, aside from it being an uncomfortable flight, the cores stay nice and cold in the air. And then the moment they land, usually whatever that is, whether it's here at the Columbia ice field or at the poles, usually we have a staged freezer truck. So there's some sort of truck or a sea can that's sitting there at -40, something ready to receive the ice right away into a freezer. And then it goes on land. So in the Columbia Ice Field example, there's a little helipad, a little outside of Nordegg, Alberta. And we have a truck that's just sitting there at -20, waiting for us. And it meets the helicopter the moment it lands. The ice goes right in the truck, and then it makes its journey on land here to the room I just showed you. So there's a lot of parts. There's a lot of parts to it.
Lots of moving parts, lots of logistics to get that back, back safely. Let's bring in our crew in California, Mr. Barcina's group, see if they have another question for us. No pressure.
I have a list that they're asking. I have one about, I guess, the health risks of your job. Like, I have a student named Caitlin who's asking if you ever get frostbite.
Yeah, that is also a very important question. There are, I would say the job in general is probably high risk. Between all of the flying in very small fixed wing aircraft and helicopters and the cold, I think those two things together, and of course the general environment, crevasses and things like that, they make me feel like I'm very glad. Usually I have the mountaineering background I have. In terms of frostbite specifically, I actually did get second-degree frostbite once on Mount Logan, and I wasn't working. That was purely an adventure trip. I was climbing it and I skied it, and that's the only place I've had damage. I think that when we go places to drill ice cores, in a lot of ways it's easier to stay safe. We're staying in one spot. We're setting up a camp, even though we're living in the cold and tents. We're not really moving, and the objective there is scientific. The objective isn't to move towards some physical goal. So, and also we don't care about weight. So we bring big down suits. We have huge boots for drilling. It's just sort of easier. So that the time that I did that frostbite got the better of me, cold got the better of me, was when I was climbing, and I didn't have any of those things. I was, really pushing the limits with how little I had brought and things like that, and my speed. So yeah, it's like I made it a long time without that damage, but yeah, there's a lot of risk in the job. That is a reality. Oh, you're on mute.
Got me. Okay, we're back. Fair enough. And I'm sure, that's a big part of your job as well, is beforehand mitigating as much of that risk that you can control.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And anyone who comes in the field too does, wilderness first aid and lots of different training to really try to mitigate those risks.
Yep. Let's bring Mrs. Shaughnessy back in and see if she's got another question from her students in Thunder Bay.
Well, we were talking about ice drilling this morning and watched a little video on it. And we were kind of wondering how you analyze the air bubbles in the ice without the air bubble escaping into the air around you.
Okay, so this lab, there are sort of two kinds of ice core labs. There's the ones like this one that we look at the liquid chemistry. So when we melt the ice and we just look at what is contained in the liquid itself. And then there's labs that specialize in gases. So we don't do gases at all. But the general concept of what those labs are able to do is that they take each individual sample after it's cut of ice, and it goes in sort of a vacuum chamber, and the ice melts. Some of them crush, but basically the ice is turned into liquid in this vacuum, and then all of the air, as that ice melts or crushes, all of the air that's in that chamber can go directly into an analytical instrument. So just in the same way, really, as we measure the liquid chemistry here, they're able to, in that vacuum, extract all the gas that came out of that ice and measure what's in the air. It's really cool.
All right. Another question. This is from Mr. Harrison's crew. Looks like Oliver in grade 6. when you're making your way, sometimes you fly in, sometimes you hike in. Is there wildlife maybe on the way? And then is there anything out on the ice field, or is it just too inhospitable?
Yeah, there's wildlife in almost all of these places except interior Antarctica. So in the middle of the Antarctic ice sheets, on the odd occasion, a bird will fly over, which is always, it's just so momentous when it happens. This happened when I was my last season in Antarctica a couple of years ago. In the middle of the East Antarctic ice sheet, just you're so far from anything. All you can see is flat white, and you've been out there for 3 months, and then suddenly a bird. Everyone just stops working. So almost always something actually shows up, even in these incredibly remote areas. On the Columbia ice field, yeah, there's a surprising amount of bird life, and sometimes you'll see like a spider or mosquito, little critters on the surface, which also feels surprising just because it still feels really remote. And then, of course, if you're working closer to the coast, which is not generally where we drill ice cores, but in the Canadian Arctic, some of the ice caps are small enough that there's polar bears, which is a whole other risk to deal with. And then in the Antarctic, also, if you're closer to the coast, it's teeming with wildlife. But the places that we drill ice cores are sort of the central, highest, most remote parts of ice caps. So usually it'll be, birds or really smaller insects that you might see crawling around on the snow surface.
Let me pop myself back in. There we go. So maybe we can squeeze in one or two more questions. Mr. Barcenas Crew, do you have another question?
Yes. My student Calvin asks, do you have a favorite place for drilling ice, like a preferred place for you, Alison?
Wow, it's hard. It's really hard to pick. I think if I had to say, I would say some of these small islands in the Canadian high Arctic. And the reason for that is that despite Antarctica's incredible beauty, it's an uninhabited continent. There's no one who lives there, right? It's just scientists and people who support scientists and adventurers, but there's nobody who inhabits Antarctica. So there's something very, very rich and extra about working in the Canadian high Arctic, where people live, and you get this extra opportunity to meet people who live there and who have lived there for so many generations, and you're allowed to work there and pass through, but it's not your land. It's just a very different feeling, and it's so amazing and rich to travel through those communities. So I'd have to say some of the smaller Canadian high Arctic islands.
All right. And Mr. Shaughnessy's Crew, let's see if you have one more question for us.
I have a question from one of my students, Delilah. She wants to know, what do you do for fun when you're up in these remote places?
Good question, Delilah. I always bring my skis. Even up on the Columbia ice field now, I love skiing and climbing, and skiing really is the best thing to do at most places that are good for drilling. So I always bring my skis, and I can't think of a time there hasn't been an opportunity to at least go out for a bit of a ski. So it's really important. It's easy to work just basically around the clock in a lot of these places. It's important to take time to just explore them a little bit and connect to them.
All right. One last question here from YouTube. Where was the class name? Oh, Miss Rainey's class. What do you think about tourism increasing to places like the ice field? Obviously this is happening more in pre-COVID times, things like the Skywalk. What do you think about things like that?
Oh my goodness. You ask the best questions. That's an extremely contentious one. I think I'm a bit torn, I have to say. the pro that I see with that, which is the same pro as sort of guiding in general, is that it allows people to access and enjoy spaces that they couldn't on their own without that help. So, with guiding, of course, it's someone relying on someone else's skill set. The Skywalk or the Athabasca tour, things like that, it's allowing people to see this and connect to these important places, which is important, that they couldn't reach on their own because they don't, have the right skill set to safely navigate crevasses and all these things. So there's a huge pro there. However, with the particular example you asked, I would say I have a bit of a hard time with it. A bus that's driving up and has a large carbon footprint and has its own set of hazards that we know and understand, just to basically get up and stand on the ice, when you can walk right up to the toe of it yourself anyhow. That sort of bit of tourism, perhaps the cons outweigh the pros. I think that probably does in my mind. But that is a very tricky one, because it is important for people to get to these spaces and to know, why they should make changes in their own lives and their own carbon footprints, which is very powerfully seen when you're actually out there. So there's a real balance with tourism.
Yeah, no, I think what you said is totally fair. And I'm sure Mrs. Rainey's class really appreciates just, an honest answer to that question. There's definitely pros and cons. All right, very cool. Well, Alison, first of all, good luck with the upcoming expeditions. I know just from talking over the last few months how excited you are to be getting back out into the field, which is great. I want to give a shout out to our camera classrooms in Thunder Bay and California. Thank you for the amazing questions. A shout out to all the classrooms tuning in via YouTube who are sending in all the great questions today. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, Alison, one more huge shout out. Thank you for spending a little time with us today, taking us into your world, and of course, our little field trip across the hallway to see some cores.
I'm so glad it worked. Thanks for inviting me. I love talking to you and hearing your great questions.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Don't forget to head over to exploringbytheseat.com. There's still, I would say, at least a dozen or more climate change events coming up over the next 3 days. So definitely check those out. And there's still room to tune in on YouTube and maybe even some camera spots. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.